Welcome to today's tutorial on interlocking crochet. Interlocking crochet, as you can see, is a beautiful technique that produces a two-color fabric. And what's exciting about it is it's reversible. So if you look on the back, you can see that it looks just as good as on the front. Now, interlocking crochet is often lumped together with mosaic crochet, partly because of how the fabric looks, but also because how you work with two colors in separate rows. When you break interlocking crochet down into its simplest blocks, what you get are two fillet meshes. And there's nothing complicated about them. The stitches you use are very simple. All you are doing is you're creating a mesh that is one double crochet up and one chain across, and then double crochet, chain across. And you are going to be working two of them at the same time. So if you have a look at your swatch, if we were to erase the blue, what you would get is a white mesh. And if you were to erase the white, what you would get is a blue mesh. And there's nothing more to it. There are no complicated stitches. All you're using are double crochets and chain stitches to create your fabric. But then how do we get from this to this? This is where things get a bit trickier, because you are not going to be working the meshes separately. You're going to be interweaving them and interlocking them. So you'll be working your blue stitches through these windows of your white mesh. And that is why, if you look here, your blue mesh is actually slightly smaller than your white mesh. It's actually one window shorter and one window narrower than the white mesh. And that's because your blue mesh is going to be framed within the white mesh. So why don't we get started on creating a swatch, and everything will become much clearer as we work. What we're going to crochet today is this swatch here, and what you need for it is you need two colors. So I'm going to be using this cream as my color A, and I'm going to use this brown color here for my color B. You will also need 4 stitch markers and a 4.5 millimeter hook. To get started, we first need to make a foundation chain in both colors. We're going to start with the cream one. I suggest that for the outer frame, you begin with a long tail foundation chain. The reason for this is a long tail foundation chain is much stretchier than a normal chain, and that will stop your work from gathering together if the foundation chain is too tight. The other reason is a long tail foundation chain creates really nice double-sided chain stitches, so it makes it really easy to know where you need to place your next stitch. It will all become clear when I show you. So I'm going to start with a tail that is about 60 centimeters long, just to be extra safe, and that will give me some extra yarn at the end to weave in. So when you make your slip knot, make sure that the loop you are pulling up is the loop from your long tail. So once you have your slip knot, insert your hook in the loop. Make sure that the yarn attached to your ball is at the back and that your long tail is at the front. Tighten it up nicely, and then I suggest you place a finger on that first loop just to hold it in place, otherwise it will swivel around your hook. Then you take your long tail and you wrap it over the top from front to back, and then anchor it in place again with that same finger. Then you can drop your long tail and just leave it hanging there. Then grab your working yarn. This is the yarn attached to your ball. And what you're going to do is hold it firmly in place at the bottom, catch your yarn and pull it through. And that is your first long tail foundation chain made. And then we just repeat this process for the rest of the chain stitches we need. So we need a total of 25. So that's 1. Wrap the long tail from front to back over your hook, leave it hanging, grab your working yarn and pull it through the loop. Wrap the yarn again, grab the working yarn and pull it through. So we have 4 chain stitches already, and I'm going to show you how to speed up the process. If you anchor the foundation chain with your thumb and hold your long tail next to it, then what you can do is if you swivel your hook underneath, and then you can grab your working yarn and pull through. Then swivel underneath and grab and pull through. So we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chains. So I'm going to speed that up to 25. Okay, and then you take your hook out and place a stitch marker in the loop. And then that's our first foundation chain for color A complete. So then set it aside and let's move on to color B. And for color B, because this is going to be inside the frame, it's less important what foundation chain you use. So I'm just going to use a much quicker normal foundation chain with normal foundation chain stitches. And we're going to chain 2 less than in the color A. So that's going to be 23 stitches. So once again, begin with a slip knot. Insert your hook. And we're going to chain 23 stitches as you normally would. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 23. Okay, so now we have our 2 chains, and I'm going to put a stitch marker in this one here. Once you have your 2 foundation chains, we can start working the first row. So we begin with row 1A, and you take your color A foundation chain, remove the stitch marker, and insert your hook again. And now we need to chain 4. This forms the edge stitch on the outside of our frame. So chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 chains counts as 1 double crochet plus 1 chain that will form the top of the first window. Then you skip 1 stitch and you work in the next stitch. This is your 23rd stitch of your foundation chain. So you double crochet and you chain 1. For every double crochet that you work across, you will chain 1 after it, and that will form the top of the window. After your chain 4, you don't need to chain any extra stitches because the 4th chain is the chain stitch already. Then we take our color B chain and we're going to lie it across the top. And this bit here is a bit fiddly. Just work slowly and count your chain stitches carefully in the color A, because you always want to skip 1 stitch before working into the next. So with your color B over the top of this chain post, you're now going to work in front of it in this chain stitch here. So you are skipping 1 and working in the next, but working in front of that chain. And then after your double crochet, you chain 1. According to the pattern, we'll be alternating back and front double crochets. So we have 1 double crochet in front, and our next one is going to be at the back. So we're going to skip this chain stitch here, and in the next one, that's this one here, we're going to work in from the back. So yarn over, bring your hook around the back of the color B chain, and then insert it from front to back through that chain stitch. And then you grab the yarn and you're going to keep it at the back of this chain. Pull the yarn through, yarn over, and pull through, and that's your double crochet done behind the color B chain. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and in the next one we're going to work a front double crochet. So yarn over your hook, With this yarn at the back, you're going to insert from front to back through the stitch, but make sure when you complete the stitch it is completed the whole way in front of your colour B chain. You don't want to enclose the chain in your stitch. And then you just finish the stitch off as a normal double crochet and chain 1. I find it easier if I'm working at the back, then I just flip this chain over the front of my work, and then this is clear and I don't need to worry so much about this one. So I skip one stitch and then I double crochet in the next one. And chain 1. My next one goes in front, so I'm going to move my colour B chain to the back. Just leave it out the way. Then I'm going to skip one chain and I'm going to double crochet in the next. So pass the colour B and hold it at the back, and we're going to work into this chain stitch here. So yarn over your hook, insert from front to back in the chain stitch, pull the yarn up and finish as a normal double crochet and chain 1. The next one goes behind this chain, so we're going to move the colour B to the front, skip one stitch and it goes in the next chain stitch. And chain 1. Then move this to the back and skip one stitch and double crochet in the next. And just continue alternating this until the end of your row. Sometimes you might just need to pull the chain, the colour B chain, through a bit if you're running out of chain stitches here. Just make sure you don't pull it the whole way out of the front, otherwise you're going to have to go back to the beginning and start again. And now we're coming up to our last one, so the colour B goes to the back and we're going to work the last double crochet in our final chain stitch, and that's going to be in front of the colour B. Now for your last double crochet, this again is going to form the outside of the frame of your fabric. So you do not need to chain 1 again after the last double crochet. That is just a simple double crochet. In the pattern, you will find the instructions include whether this is in front or at the back. It actually doesn't matter what side the pattern says to work this last colour A stitch. Because it's part of the frame, it falls outside the pattern, and you will notice as you work up the rows that it is just a simple double crochet, inevitably outside the pattern, on the front or the back, it does not matter. So at the end, take your hook out and put the stitch marker back in the loop. And that's your row 1A finished. For row 1B, we need to go back to the beginning without turning the work, and we're going to work the colour B from right to left to complete the first row. So take your stitch marker out, replace your hook. What I find with this one is it's sometimes helpful to just know where your first stitch is going to go. So this first chain here, that's chain 23, and we need to work our first double crochet into chain 21. So that's 23, 22, 21. So I'm just going to pop a little stitch marker under there, just so I know when I come back that's going to be my first stitch. So the first thing we do, as we did with the colour A, is we're going to chain 4. As with colour A, the chain 4 represents 1 double crochet plus the chain after the double crochet. And we're going to work the first stitch in around the back of this colour A, into that stitch where we've placed the stitch marker. Because if you look at it, this side stitch rests across the window, the first window of your colour A, and we need to now work the next stitch over this second window of your colour A. But the pattern says work behind. So what that means is remove your stitch marker, make sure you've got your finger pointing to what stitch you're going into, yarn over, and we're going to come around the back through that second window and work into the chain stitch there as you normally would, and double crochet. Then you chain one after, and then your next stitch is going to go in front. And what that means is you need to yarn over and work through the front of that white chain. So insert your hook. You have to skip one chain of your colour B, and I find that it's quite hard to see, especially when you've got the colour A double crochet resting across the chain. So often what I do is I guess which stitch it's going to go into. I think that one looks about the right one, it's in front of that window, so I insert my hook, and then if you turn over you can actually check. There's the chain stitch we worked our last double crochet into. You can see there's a horizontal bar, that's the top of the next chain stitch which we're going to skip. My hook is inside the following one, so I've guessed correctly, and that is the next stitch we need. Then you grab it and you pull it through to the front, because that's where we need to work the next double crochet, and then you finish it off as normal. So there you can see we've already got one at the back and one in front, and they overlap with the windows of the previous chain. Then chain one after that double crochet, and the next one goes in the back. And then chain one after. Your next one's going to go in front, so you skip one stitch of the brown chain and it goes in the next. And I'm just going to check that's correct. So there's my previous one, there's the chain I'm skipping, so I'm in the correct place. But this needs to go on the front, so you grab it and you pull it through to the front before you pull up a loop onto your hook. And then you finish it off as a normal double crochet and chain one. And then the next one goes behind, so yarn over. We're going to skip one stitch and it goes in the next one. And chain one. And then you continue alternating front and back across the row. Sometimes you have to just push the chain around so that you can see the next stitch. And now we come to our last one, and that's going to go at the back, and it's going to go into our first chain, which as you can see has tightened up a little, so I'm just going to loosen it a bit. And then I should be able to get my hook through that. And I can tighten up the tail of the chain. And then place your stitch marker in it. And that's row 1, parts A and B complete. We can now turn our work over, and we're going to work row 2, colour A first, and then colour B first, from right to left. And you need to check the pattern and see what side your colour B yarn needs to be on for your A row. So in this case, row 2, it says you have to have your colour at the back, So make sure your yarn, your ball of yarn, and your stitch with the stitch marker is resting behind your work. And you've got your colour A at the front, ready to go. So remove your stitch marker, insert your hook, and chain 4. This chain 4 isn't given in the pattern at the start of your A rows. The pattern notes say to do it, and then it's never mentioned again. So you'll just have to remember at the start of every A row, your first stitch is a chain 4, and then you can start with the instructions in the pattern. So we've left the yarn at the back, that's colour back, and then we've got to repeat back, front, across the row. Once you have your chain 4 with your brown yarn at the back, your next stitch is going to go into the top of the double crochet in the same colour. You just ignore the brown yarn, leave it out the way, and you're going to work in that next double crochet. And then you bring it to the back and finish off as a normal double crochet. And then chain 1. Your next one is at the front, and again, your next stitch is this white post here. So you yarn over, and going from front to back through the top of that stitch, you pull it up onto the front of your work, you pull the yarn up, and finish off the stitch as a normal double crochet, and then chain 1. The next one you go through the back, so you yarn over, you insert your hook through the window, through the top of that next white stitch, going from front to back, as you normally would. So this is how you would normally insert your hook, from front to back through the top of the stitch. Then you grab your yarn, you pull it up, and you finish it off as a normal double crochet. Then chain 1. Your next one is going to be at the front. So you yarn over, insert through the top of that stitch, but here you can see my hook is at the back because that was the easiest way for me to collect that stitch. But this stitch needs to be on the front, so just grab it, pull it through the window so that it is on the front, and then you can pull the loop up onto your hook and finish it off. So it's really important that you complete each stitch on the correct side, because if you leave it on the other side when you pull up a loop, it will catch the brown mesh inside this stitch, and at no point do we want the meshes to be caught up together. They are simply just carefully interwoven around for this interlocking technique. So then we chain 1 after that one, and then we double crochet into the top of the next one from the back. And then now you can see the next one that is our last one, and the pattern says to do it in front, but actually it doesn't matter whether it's the front or the back because it's on the edge. But for consistency's sake in the pattern, it will often tell you to do it front or back as part of the pattern repeat. So what you need to do is you need to find the third chain from the base. So that's chain 1, 2, 3. And in this third one, that acts as the top of your double crochet, and that's where you will work your last double crochet. So under those 2 loops, pull up the yarn and finish off your double crochet. And then place a stitch marker to hold it. You can always just leave a long loop if you want, but I like the security of having a stitch marker because then you don't drop that loop. Okay, we're now ready to move on to the B row. So this is row 2B, and we're going to take the stitch marker out and replace it with the hook. But just like our color A row, we begin with chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Different patterns have different quirks, and sometimes this chain 4 isn't given in the pattern, much like the color A, chain 4. But in this pattern it is given because it confirms whether this should be on the front or the back. So this is at the back of our row, and the stitch we need is a back stitch, so it's in the correct place. Then our next stitch will go at the front, so we skip the chain stitch of the color B and we work into the top of the double crochet of the same color. So you work from front to back through it. Make sure your hook is at the front before you pull a loop up onto your hook, and then you finish it off like a normal double crochet, and then you chain one. The next one is going to go at the back, so yarn over, and we're going to bring our hook through the window and then grab that loop. So you're effectively inserting your hook from front to back through the top of that stitch, and then you pull up a loop on the back and then yarn over and finish off the stitch as a normal double crochet. Then chain one. When it comes to the last stitch of your color B, it really matters whether you do the stitch behind or in front. So check the pattern, and we've had our last stitch at the back, so this one needs to go at the front. And we need to find the third chain stitch that marks the top of the double crochet on the edge of the color B. So this is the stitch you skip, and then it needs to go in through the next one. That's this one here. So through the front. It's a bit tricky to pick up. I'm going to just look for the loops on the back. So there's one, and then the other one. It's a bit hard to find, but you can just grab it. I use my fingernail just to pull it on. There we go. But it has to be at the front, so pull it through the window to the front of your work, and then you can pull up a loop and finish off the double crochet as normal. And that's your B row complete. At the end of that, once both yarns are back on the same side, you turn your work and you're ready to continue with the next row. I've crocheted on ahead and I have just finished row 6B, and we're going to crochet row 7A together again. So take off your stitch marker, insert your hook, chain 4, just to confirm, the pattern says that the color B needs to be at the front, so we bring that forward, and then our first stitch is a front stitch, so yarn over and work it on the front. Chain 1 and on the back. Something worth bearing in mind when you get to the end of your row and you're going to work into your third chain at the end. One option is actually to double crochet in that space itself, like so. That works quite alright for the color A, because at the end you're going to work a border around the edges, working around these loops here. So it doesn't actually matter if you work into the third chain itself or into the space at the end. I like to work through the chain itself just for consistency's sake, because when you come to do that on your color B chain, if you work through the space for your last outer stitch, sometimes it can distort the shape of that window. You might get it more rounded or more square than you want it. So you might just want to experiment with that and see what effect you are happier with and what you find easier to do. But for now, I'm just going to work into the third chain of that 4 chain. And that's the last stitch of that row. Then you come back to the other side again, pick up your B, which is now sitting on the front, which is where we want it to be, and we chain 4 for the first stitch. this counts as our first front stitch. So the next one is going to be a back stitch into the next double crochet. So insert your hook from front to back through that window. And then front stitch. You just keep alternating front and back across the row. Okay, and then our last one, we're going to work it in the back into the third chain, and that's this one here. And we're now finished with the colour B, so we can go ahead and fasten off. So just chain one, cut your yarn, pull it through and tighten to close. Okay, and then we're done with the colour B. We have one last row of colour A to do, and that's going to complete the pattern and give us the same finish to the frame as we have at the beginning of the pattern. So turn your work. You can ignore this tail here. Place the loop on your hook. And chain 4. Okay, and then we're going to be working in front and back, alternating across. That's the pattern complete, and if you want, you can crochet a border around to neaten up the edges of your frame. So to do that, you turn your work, you chain 1, and you're going to work 1 single crochet into each chain space and double crochet around the top. And then around the sides, you're going to work 2 single crochets into each of these spaces down the side. So 1 single crochet per chain and double crochet here, 2 single crochets per space down the side. So here's 1, and then when you get to the corner window, I like to work 5 single crochets just to get around to the other side. That's 2, 3, 4, and 5. That will give us a nice rounded corner. And then in the next window, I'm going to work 2 single crochets. When you reach the last window, work 2 around the post, an extra single crochet for the corner, and then we're actually going to work into these 2 chain stitches here. That will give us a total of 5 for this corner. And then we can continue. And this is the other side of our foundation chain, and we're going to just work 1 into the post and 1 into the chain stitch in between. When you get to the last window, you've got 2 more chain stitches of your foundation chain, so you can just work 1, 2, and then we need 3 more for the corner. So 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to work over my tail to save me having to weave it in later. Then it's 2 single crochets in each of these windows here. And the last window, we already worked one stitch in the chain space. So I'm going to do 4 single crochets here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the first single crochet that we made at the beginning of the row. And then that's it, you can fasten off. And then all you need to do is weave in your ends and your swatch is complete. Well, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial and I hope you have a go. It's a really fun technique and happy crafting.